Seven centers, seven colors, seven ways consciousness expresses itself through human life. For thousands of years, spiritual traditions have spoken of invisible energies flowing through the body. In India, these centers became known as chakras. They were described as wheels, vortices, or spinning points of energy that influence everything from survival and emotion to intuition and spiritual awakening. Today, the idea of chakras has become almost unavoidable. They're discussed in yoga studios, meditation retreats, self help books, social media videos, and inevitably by someone named Moonbeam selling handcrafted crystal water for only three easy payments. But beneath the modern interpretation lies a deeper question. What if these energy centers are more than symbols? What if they represent a real structure of consciousness itself? Not physical organs, not glands, not something a surgeon could remove, but an energetic anatomy underlying the human experience. According to the law of one, that is exactly what they are. Ra refers to them not as chakras, but as energy centers or rays. And while many spiritual systems focus on opening these centers, Ra's teachings emphasize something slightly different: balance. Because in the law of one, spiritual evolution is not primarily about gaining powers. It is not about seeing auras, it is not about activating hidden abilities. It is about allowing intelligent energy to move freely through the self. Ra describes these centers as the means through which consciousness experiences reality. Each center corresponds to a different aspect of being: survival, personal identity, relationships, love, communication, spiritual awareness, and finally, the total expression of the self. Taken together, they form a kind of map. A map not of the physical body, but of consciousness itself. And according to Ra, every experience we have eventually interacts with these centers. Every fear, every conflict, every act of love, every moment of forgiveness, every lesson, every catalyst, everything leaves its mark somewhere within this energetic system. In one of the most concise descriptions of the energy centers, Ra explains: while it is a primary priority to activate or unblock each energy center, it is also a primary priority at that point to begin to refine the balances between the energies so that each tone of the chord of total vibratory beingness resonates in clarity, tune, and harmony with each other energy. That statement contains an important clue. The centers may be active, yet still not be balanced. And balance, as we will see, is one of the central themes of Ra's teachings. Because in the law of one, the goal is not to become something other than yourself. The goal is not to force energy upward. The goal is not to transcend your humanity. The goal is to know yourself, accept yourself, forgive yourself, and in doing so, gradually remove the distortions that interrupt the natural flow of energy through the system. So, before we explore imbalance, crystallization, healing, or the geometry of the energy centers themselves, we first need to understand what these seven centers actually are, and why Ra believed they reveal the story of an entire lifetime. Long before the Law of One was ever channeled, long before modern yoga studios, long before self help books and guided meditations, human beings were already attempting to understand something invisible. Not the stars, not the weather, not the physical body, but consciousness itself. The idea that human beings possess subtle centers of energy can be traced back thousands of years to ancient India. The earliest roots of the concept appear within the Vedic tradition, one of the oldest surviving religious traditions on Earth. The Vedas themselves do not describe the familiar seven chakra system that most people know today. Instead, they speak more broadly of life force, sacred sound, consciousness, and the relationship between the individual and the cosmos. The Sanskrit word often associated with this life force is prana. Prana was understood as the vital energy that animates living beings. Breath was seen not merely as air entering the lungs, but as a carrier of life itself. Over centuries, these ideas evolved. By the time later yogic and tantric traditions emerged, practitioners began describing a subtle energetic body that existed alongside the physical body. This subtle body was said to contain channels known as nadis. Some traditions describe tens of thousands of these channels. Three became especially important: Ida, Pingala, and Shushumna. These channels were believed to carry the flow of subtle energy throughout the body. Along the central channel, the Shushumna, certain points of concentrated energy were described. These became known as chakras. The Sanskrit word chakra literally means wheel, a fitting image. The centers were often depicted as spinning wheels, rotating vortices, or lotus flowers unfolding within the subtle body. Different traditions describe different numbers of chakras. Some systems taught five, others six, others many more. The now familiar seven chakra model became especially influential through later tantric and yogic traditions. Each center was associated with specific qualities of human experience: survival, identity, power, love, expression, insight, transcendence. Over time, elaborate symbolic systems developed around these centers: colors, petals, sacred syllables, deities, geometric forms, meditative practices. Entire spiritual disciplines emerged around understanding and balancing these energies. What is remarkable is that these teachings developed centuries before modern anatomy, neuroscience, or psychology. Ancient practitioners were attempting to map the inner life using the language available to them. They were not dissecting the physical body, they were exploring subjective experience. And whether one views these descriptions literally, symbolically, psychologically, or spiritually, they represent one of humanity's oldest attempts to answer a profound question: why do human beings experience themselves the way they do? Why do some people seem trapped by fear? Why do others struggle with relationships? Why do some radiate compassion? Why do others possess extraordinary clarity, wisdom, or presence? The chakra system became one answer to those questions: a map of consciousness, a framework for understanding human growth, a model suggesting that life is not merely physical, but also energetic and spiritual, which admittedly is a far more interesting explanation than because that's just how Steve is. Thousands of years later, a very different source would present a surprisingly familiar framework. When Ra discusses the energy centers, they do not speak of Hindu gods. They don't focus on rituals or mantras. Instead, they describe seven primary energy centers through which consciousness experiences and processes reality. The similarities are obvious, but there are also important differences. And understanding those differences is essential. Because while traditional chakra systems often focus on techniques, practices, and awakenings, the law of one places its emphasis somewhere else entirely: balance. Not power, not attainment, not mystical experiences, balance. And to understand what Ra means by that, we first need to understand the seven energy centers themselves. What are they? What does each represent? And why did Ra believe every human experience eventually passes through them? If the chakra traditions of India provided a map, the Law of One provides its own interpretation of that map. Ra does not spend much time discussing symbolism, rituals, sacred syllables, or esoteric practices. Instead, the energy centers are described in remarkably practical terms. They are the means through which consciousness processes experience. Every thought, every emotion, every relationship, every challenge, every triumph, every distortion, everything eventually interacts with one or more of these centers. And while many modern descriptions portray the chakras as separate compartments, Ra presents them more like a unified system. Energy centers from the base. It moves upward. Each center processes that energy according to its own nature. When the flow is unobstructed, the entity becomes increasingly capable of expressing its true nature. When distortions occur, blockages develop. The result is imbalance. To understand how this works, we need to examine each center individually, beginning at the foundation, the red ray energy center, the center most often overlooked precisely because it is so fundamental. Red ray, survival and beingness. Ra associates red ray with a basic life force: survival, vitality, incarnation itself. This center concerns the elemental experience of being alive: food, shelter, reproduction, physical existence, the continuation of the species. Unlike the higher centers, red ray is not primarily concerned with personal identity or spiritual growth. It is the foundation upon which everything else rests. Ra describes it as: the red ray body is your chemical body. However, it is not the body which you have as clothing in the physical. It is the unconstructed material of the body, the elemental body without form. And elsewhere, red ray is the foundation. Without a stable foundation, the higher centers struggle to function efficiently. A building may have beautiful upper floors, but if the foundation cracks, problems eventually appear everywhere else. Orange ray, the individual self. Moving upward, we encounter orange ray. This center concerns the self as an individual: personal identity, self worth, self acceptance, one to one interactions, how a person relates to themselves and to another individual. Ra frequently associates orange ray distortions with issues involving personal power, self image, and individual relationships. This is where questions such as: who am I? Am I worthy? How do I relate to another person? Begin to emerge. Many struggles involving insecurity, possessiveness, jealousy, shame, or personal inadequacy can manifest through distortions in this center. Yellow ray, society and groups. If orange ray concerns the individual, yellow ray concerns the individual within groups. Family, organizations, governments, religions, businesses, nations, social roles. This center governs how we relate to larger social structures: parent, employee, citizen, leader, follower. The yellow ray is heavily involved in third density experience because human life is deeply intertwined with groups and social systems. Conflicts involving authority, status, control, competition, and social identity frequently emerge here. In other words, nearly every office meeting in recorded history. According to Ra, many of humanity's lessons occur through yellow ray interactions because third density is specifically designed to explore relationships between selves. Green ray, universal love. The green ray marks a major transition. Below green ray, consciousness is primarily concerned with survival, individuality, and social identity. Green ray introduces something entirely different: acceptance, compassion, unconditional love. Ra describes green ray as the center from which true universal love becomes possible. Not transactional love, not conditional love, not I'll love you if you behave the way I want, but acceptance of self and others as portions of the Creator. This center is especially important because Ra repeatedly describes it as the springboard into higher spiritual development. Without Green Ray, the higher centers cannot function in a balanced manner. Love becomes the bridge, the opening, the turning point. Blue Ray, communication and truth. Above the heart center lies Blue Ray. Ra describes this center as involving communication, honesty, and free expression. Yet, it goes deeper than simply speaking. Blue Ray concerns authentic communication, the willingness to express truth, the courage to be seen as one truly is, and equally important, the ability to hear and understand others. Many people can talk, far fewer can communicate, even fewer can listen. Blu ray begins to activate when a person becomes willing to express themselves openly without manipulation, fear, or pretense. Indigo ray, the gateway. If green ray is the great opening, indigo ray is the great mystery. Ra repeatedly treats this center differently from the others. It is associated with faith, spiritual work, inner discipline, the deeper realization of unity. Most importantly, Ra identifies indigo ray as the gateway to intelligent infinity. This idea appears throughout the material. The Indigo Center is connected to healing, spiritual seeking, transformation, and the deeper work of consciousness itself. Many of the abilities often described as mystical or spiritual are associated with activity in this center, yet Ra consistently warns against becoming fascinated with abilities for their own sake. The goal is not power, the goal is alignment. Violet Ray, the readout. Finally, we arrive at Violet Ray, and here the Law of One becomes particularly interesting. Unlike the other centers, Violet Ray is not something Ra discusses balancing directly. Instead, it functions as a kind of summary, a reflection of the entire system. Ra explains: the Violet Ray is constant and does not figure into a discussion of the functions of ray activation, in that it is the mark, the register, the identity, the true vibration of an entity. In other words, Violet Ray is not simply another chakra to improve. It is the total readout of the being, the complete energetic signature of the entity at a given moment, a snapshot of consciousness itself. Taken together, these seven centers form a complete spectrum, from survival to individuality to society to love to truth to spiritual realization to the total expression of the self. And according to Ra, every human being possesses all seven. The question is not whether the centers exist, the question is how balanced they are. Because having energy centers is one thing, allowing energy to flow through them freely is another. And according to the law of one, that difference may explain much of the suffering, conflict, and illness we encounter during a lifetime. Which brings us to one of Ra's most practical teachings: how imbalance develops and how it can be healed. If there is one place where the Law of One differs from many modern discussions of chakras, it may be here. Today, when people speak about balancing chakras, the conversation often revolves around techniques: meditations, visualizations, breathing exercises, crystals, sounds, practices intended to open, clear, or activate the energy centers. The Law of One takes a different approach. Ra's focus is not primarily on techniques, it is on understanding. Because according to Ra, imbalance does not originate in the energy centers themselves. The energy centers simply reveal distortions already present within consciousness. The blockage is not the problem, the blockage is the symptom. The deeper issue lies within the patterns of thought, belief, fear, resistance, and misunderstanding that created it. This is why Ra gives a surprisingly simple answer when asked about balancing the centers. Ra states, the steps are only one. That is, an understanding of the energy centers which make up the mind body spirit complex. At first glance, that answer may seem almost disappointingly simple. No elaborate ritual, no secret technique, no mystical initiation. Just understanding. But the more one studies the law of one, the more profound that answer becomes. Because every experience in life provides information about the state of the energy centers. Every fear reveals something, every conflict reveals something, every emotional reaction reveals something, every recurring struggle reveals something. Life itself becomes a diagnostic tool. According to Ra, the purpose of Catalyst is not punishment, it is education. Catalyst reveals distortion, and once distortion is seen clearly, balance becomes possible. Consider anger. One person becomes angry and suppresses it. Another becomes angry and explodes outward. A third observes the anger carefully. Where did it come from? What belief produced it? What fear lies beneath it? What expectation was violated? What part of the self remains unaccepted? The law of one repeatedly encouraged this kind of examination. Not judgment, not repression, understanding. I don't know about you, but on the rare occasion that I feel anger, I can actually sense that emotion stirring in those lower chakras. The energy centers are not balanced by fighting ourselves, they are balanced by knowing ourselves, which sounds much easier until you spent 5 minutes observing your own thoughts. Ra explains the process in greater detail. The key to balance may then be seen in the unstudied, spontaneous, and honest response of the entities toward experiences, thus using experience to the utmost, then applying the balancing exercises and achieving the proper attitude for the most purified spectrum of energy center manifestation in violet ray. This statement contains several important ideas. First, Ra values honest experience, not artificial spirituality, not carefully constructed appearances. Honest experience. The spontaneous response reveals what is actually present within consciousness. If jealousy arises, that information is valuable. If fear arises, that information is valuable. If resentment arises, that too is valuable. The distortion has become visible. Second, Ross suggests that experience should be used to the utmost. In other words, catalysts should not be wasted. Every interaction becomes an opportunity for self discovery. Every difficulty becomes an opportunity to uncover imbalance. Every emotional reaction becomes a clue. Third, Ra references what students of the Law of One often call the balancing exercises. These exercises appear most clearly in Session 5. The basic principle is elegant. When a strong emotional reaction occurs, the seeker identifies that reaction, then consciously identifies its opposite. If impatience is present, patience is sought. If fear is present, courage is contemplated. If judgment is present, acceptance is explored. The goal is not to suppress either side. The goal is to recognize that both potentials already exist within the self. Balance emerges through awareness, not denial, not resistance, awareness. This process gradually reduces distortion within the energy system. The energy centers become less blocked, energy flows more freely. The entity becomes more able to express its true nature. And according to Ra, this process affects far more than emotional well being. It may even influence physical health. Throughout the material, Ross suggests that persistent distortions can eventually manifest within the body itself. The body reflects consciousness, the mind influences energy, energy influences the body. While Ra never claims that every illness results from spiritual imbalance, they repeatedly describe disease as sometimes arising from unresolved distortions within the mind body spirit complex. In this view, healing is not merely physical, it is holistic, a restoration of harmony within the entire being. This brings us back to a point that is easy to overlook. The goal is not perfect chakras, the goal is not constant bliss, the goal is not becoming some permanently enlightened superhuman. The goal is balance, a willingness to know the self, accept the self, forgive the self, and allow experience to teach what it came to teach. Because according to Ra, as distortions diminish and balance increases, something remarkable begins to happen. The energy centers do not merely become active, they begin to crystallize. And that is where the law of one's description becomes truly fascinating. Before we continue our discussion of the energy centers, there's one unusual detail from the Law of One that is worth mentioning. It does not fundamentally change the process of balancing. It does not require knowledge for spiritual growth. But it is one of those fascinating little observations that tends to stick with people. In session 51, Don Elkins asks Ra about the appearance of the energy centers when they become crystallized. Ra responds by describing each center as taking on a distinct geometric form. According to Ra, the red energy center often is in the shape of the spoked wheel, the orange energy center in the flower shape containing three petals, the yellow center again in a rounded shape, many faceted, as a star. The green energy center, sometimes called the lotus shape, the number of points of crystalline structure dependent upon the strength of the center. The blue energy center, capable of having perhaps 100 facets and capable of great flashing brilliance. The indigo center, a more quiet center, which has the basic triangular or three petal shape in many, although some adepts who have balanced the lower energies may create more faceted forms. The violet energy center is the least variable and is sometimes described in your philosophy as thousand petaled, as it is the sum of the mind body spirit complex distortion totality. Interestingly, Ra provides very little additional commentary. They do not spend pages discussing the geometry, they do not explain how one might observe these forms, nor do they suggest that seekers should become preoccupied with them. The point seems less about the shapes themselves and more about what those shapes represent: order, coherence, balance, the gradual refinement of consciousness. In other words, when an energy center becomes crystallized, it has become organized, stable, capable of transmitting energy with minimal distortion, much like a crystal allows light to pass through with clarity. Yet, despite the unusual imagery, the underlying message remains consistent with everything else Ra teaches. The goal is not geometry, the goal is the balance that produces it. Which brings us to our next point: activation versus balance. By this point, it might be tempting to think the objective is simple: activate all seven energy centers, open them fully, push energy upward, reach the highest chakra possible. But that is not how Ra describes the process. In fact, one of the most subtle and important teachings in the Law of One is the distinction between activation and balance, because activation alone is not the goal. An energy center may be active and still be distorted. A center may be highly energized and yet remain unbalanced. This is one reason why spiritual development can sometimes produce confusion. A person may experience profound insight while still struggling with anger. They may possess remarkable intuition while having difficulty with relationships. They may speak eloquently about love while remaining trapped in fear. The activation of a center does not necessarily mean the lessons of that center have been integrated. Ra alludes to this distinction repeatedly throughout the material. The purpose of evolution is not simply to move energy upward. It is to allow energy to move upward without significant distortion. The lower centers are not obstacles to transcend, they are foundations to be understood and balanced. This is especially important because many spiritual traditions have, at times, treated the lower centers as less desirable. The physical world becomes something to escape, the body becomes something to overcome. Ordinary human life becomes viewed as a distraction from spirituality. Ra takes a very different approach. Red ray matters, orange ray matters, yellow ray matters. The higher centers are not replacements for the lower ones, they are built upon them. A distorted foundation creates distortions higher in the system. Imagine constructing a cathedral upon unstable ground. The highest tower may appear magnificent, but eventually the cracks beneath it begin to show. In much the same way, unresolved distortions in survival, identity, or relationships often influence the functioning of the higher centers. This is one reason Ra frequently discusses the lower rays before discussing the higher ones. The progression is cumulative. Each center contributes to the whole. Spiritual growth, as it turns out, is less like launching a rocket and more like repairing a house while you're living in it. The heart of the matter can perhaps be summarized in a single idea: balance is not perfection, balance is acceptance. The balanced entity does not eliminate anger, the balanced entity understands anger. The balanced entity does not eliminate fear, it understands it. The balanced entity does not become free of all human limitations. The balanced entity becomes increasingly aware of them without becoming controlled by them. This understanding leads naturally to another important realization. Many seekers spend enormous effort attempting to awaken higher consciousness. Yet, according to Ra, higher consciousness becomes increasingly accessible as distortions are reduced throughout the entire system. The focus is not on reaching upward, the focus is on removing what obstructs the flow. And when that flow becomes sufficiently balanced, consciousness begins to function in new ways. This is particularly true of the next center, a center Ra repeatedly treats with special significance, a center associated with faith, transformation, healing, and contact with something far beyond ordinary awareness. The indigo ray energy center, the gateway to intelligent infinity. Of all the energy centers discussed in the Law of One, none receives quite the same treatment as indigo ray. Red ray provides the foundation, orange and yellow ray shape the personal and social self, green ray opens the heart, blue ray enables honest communication, but indigo ray occupies a unique position. Again and again, Ra returns to this center when discussing spiritual evolution, healing, transformation, and contact with the deeper levels of reality. In many ways, indigo ray represents the threshold between ordinary consciousness and what Ra describes as intelligent infinity. Ra states, the indigo ray is the ray of, shall we say, awareness of the creator as self. Thus, one whose indigo ray vibrations have been activated can offer the energy transfer of creator to creator. This is a remarkable statement. Notice what Ra does not say. They do not describe Indigo Ray as a center of psychic powers. They do not describe it as a center of mystical visions. They do not describe it as a center of supernatural abilities. Instead, the emphasis is placed on realization, awareness of the creator as self. That distinction is important. Throughout the Law of One, spiritual progress is measured less by what an entity can do and more by what an entity understands itself to be. The farther a seeker progresses, the more the illusion of separation begins to dissolve. The self is no longer seen as isolated. Others are no longer viewed as fundamentally separate. Life itself begins to appear as an interconnected expression of a single consciousness, of the Creator itself. Indigo Ray is deeply connected to this realization. For this reason, Ra frequently associates Indigo Ray with faith, not belief, faith. The difference matters. Belief can exist without experience. Faith in the Law of One often refers to a deep inner knowing that persists even in uncertainty, a trust in the underlying unity of existence, a trust in the Creator, a trust in the self, a trust in the process of evolution itself. This helps explain why Ra often discusses the indigo ray in connection with what they call the discipline of the personality. The seeker is gradually refining their perception, learning self honesty, learning humility, learning acceptance, learning to see beyond the illusion of separation. The result is not necessarily spectacular. In fact, it may appear quite ordinary from the outside. Yet inwardly, profound changes are taking place. Ra also connects indigo ray with healing. This is one of the reasons many discussions of healing appear alongside discussions of this center. However, Ra's explanation differs significantly from many popular notions of energy healing. The healer is not viewed as someone who personally creates healing. Rather, the healer becomes a channel, a pathway, a means through which intelligent energy may flow. The source remains the creator. The healer merely becomes less distorted, more transparent, more able to allow that energy to move through them. This is one reason Ra repeatedly emphasizes balance before power. Without balance, attempts to work with higher energies becomes increasingly distorted. The foundation must support the structure. The lower centers must cooperate with the higher. Otherwise, the seeker risks confusing spiritual development with spiritual ambition, which may be one of the easiest traps in spirituality. The ego can wear surprisingly convincing angel wings. There is another reason Indigo Ray occupies such an important place in the Law of One. It serves as the gateway, the meeting point between the individual self and intelligent infinity. Ra explains, the indigo ray, though precious, is that ray worked upon only by the adept, as you would call it. It is the gateway to intelligent infinity, bringing intelligent energy through. This is the energy center worked upon in those teachings considered inner, hidden, and occult, for this ray is that which is infinite in possibilities. As you are aware, those who heal, teach, and work for the Creator in any way which may be seen to be both radiant and balanced are those activities which are indigo ray. This statement sometimes leads to misunderstanding. The word adept may evoke images of gurus, monks, or mystics. Yet, in the Law of One, an adept is simply one who consciously undertakes the deeper work of spiritual evolution, a seeker who intentionally studies consciousness itself, a seeker who begins exploring not merely life, but the nature of awareness. And according to Ra, this deeper work gradually prepares the energy systems for something extraordinary. The centers become increasingly balanced, increasingly coherent, increasingly ordered, until eventually they begin to take on a new quality altogether. A quality Ra refers to as that crystallization that we spoke of earlier. And all of this brings us to our final point, perhaps the most important point of all. Because when Ra speaks about the energy centers, the discussion is never really about chakras. It is about self knowledge. At the beginning of this episode, we asked a simple question. What if the chakra system is more than symbolism? What if it represents a real structure within consciousness itself? The Law of One offers one possible answer, not as proven science, not as established fact, but as a framework for understanding the human experience. Within that framework, the energy centers are not merely spiritual concepts, they are mirrors. Each reflects a different aspect of the self: our relationship with survival, our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with others, our relationship with love, truth, faith, and ultimately our relationship with the Creator. Yet, perhaps the most surprising lesson is this: Ra never seems particularly concerned with whether the energy centers are opened. The focus is almost always on whether they are balanced. And balance, according to the Law of One, is not achieved through force. It is not achieved through denial. It is not achieved by pretending to be more spiritual than we actually are. Instead, balance emerges through understanding, through honest self observation, through accepting what we discover, through using experience as a teacher. This may be why Ra's guidance is often so simple. Pay attention, observe your reactions, learn from Catalyst, know yourself, accept yourself, forgive yourself, then continue again and again. For many seekers, this may be an unexpectedly ordinary answer. There is no secret initiation, no hidden ceremony, no promise of instant enlightenment. Just the steady work of becoming conscious of what already exists within. The anger, the fear, the jealousy, the love, the compassion, the courage, the wisdom, the confusion, all of it. Because in the Law of One, every experience has value, every experience reveals something, every experience offers an opportunity for greater balance. And as that balance gradually develops, something subtle begins to happen. The energy centers become less distorted, the flow of energy becomes more harmonious, the self begins increasingly transparent to the Creator. Not because anything new has been added, but because less stands in the way. This brings us back to one of the most important ideas in the entire material. The purpose of spiritual evolution is not to become something else. It is to become more fully what you already are, a portion of the Creator learning to know itself, a unique expression of consciousness exploring its own nature. And perhaps that is why Ra places such emphasis on the violet ray, the final readout of the entire system. The energetic summary of a lifetime's worth of choices, lessons, distortions, understandings, and realizations. Not a score, not a judgment, a reflection, a snapshot of who we have become, or perhaps more accurately, a snapshot of who we have remembered ourselves to be, which may be the strangest spiritual journey of all. Spending an entire lifetime searching for something that was quietly present from the very beginning. Thank you for watching or listening. I wish you all love, light, peace, and joy. Take care.